My sister? Oh, she's pure evil in designer attire, ready to shred any family contract that isn't written in blood. She thought I'd let her take it all, my share and my pride included. But one small misstep from her, and a clever little trick from me, and suddenly, this game has become far more dangerous than she could have anticipated. Brace yourself. It's about to get explosive. So, my name is Jacob. I'm 29, and my whole life has been spent watching my sister Taylor turn gold into garbage, or sometimes the other way around, depending on what suits her best. Who would have thought I'd one day see her, dressed like Cleopatra, behind the counter of an antique shop? Why? Because Taylor always hated our family business. Honestly, the thought of dealing in ancient junk, as she called it, made her wrinkle her nose as if at a bad smell. In her mind, antiques were like an old trunk in the attic. Dusty, dull, and completely useless. What's interesting, though, is that my father, a man of iron principles, built this business specifically for the two of us. Well, more accurately, for me. Taylor just tagged along, rolling her eyes and scoffing that real classy girls don't deal in stale rubbish. Oh, sure. In her view, classy girls live in huge mansions with rose gardens, nothing less. She's the type who believes that life is a photo shoot for a glossy magazine where every angle in the frame is designed just for her. But all that comedy of her fake chic came to an abrupt end when Dad got sick. Suddenly, she did the unthinkable. She announced that it's time to get serious. And imagine this. Instead of glam parties and spa trips, she started showing up at the office, though only in outfits screaming, "Look at me, I'm a goddess." All her attempts to play the role of a businesswoman looked more like a one-person show, just for me. There was something eerie in the way she changed, like an actress swapping roles for the sake of profit. By the time Dad passed away, I'd already started noticing that her interest in business was hardly innocent. I'd naively assumed he'd leave the business to me. After all, I was the one who truly valued it as a priceless legacy. But no. The very day after the funeral, I realized that somehow the majority of the business had landed in Taylor's hands. You know, that was one of those moments when you stand there trying to grasp what in the world just happened. The morning after the funeral, Taylor barged into the office as if the entire day was a gift, just for her. She was practically glowing, with an expression like she was about to be crowned. I swear, give her a throne, and she'd happily sit there, pretending to rule the world. "Oh, Jake, you don't mind if I take Dad's office, do you?" she asked with a sweet smile, her tone hinting, "Of course you don't mind. You're no one to me." I looked at her, and for a second, I wanted to remind her that, technically, she had no say here. But she was already striding confidently toward the office. Clearly, she'd already decided. I didn't answer. I just swallowed my anger. They say it's best to keep yourself in check. In that moment, I would have loved to forget that advice and do something less restrained. But no, I had no time for scenes. I needed to find out what she was up to. From that day on, Taylor acted like a ruler, rifling through all the documents, poking around the company's business, as if she were already the rightful owner. And she didn't just dig around. She was searching, pinpointing where to sign so she could sweep everything up for herself. She was a ruthless headhunter, all right. She fired 2 employees who had worked with our father for almost as long as I've been alive, and casually decided that the priceless part of our antiques collection was now her personal plaything. When she got to the 18th century China set, I lost it. This set was practically the soul of my father's collection, its crowning jewel. He'd always said he would never sell it, but apparently that meant nothing to Taylor. She was ready to toss it aside like some random trinket. I barely held back and asked her, "Do you even realize that this is part of Dad's legacy?" She just smirked, brushing imaginary dust off her shoulder, and replied, "Jake, let's be honest. You're nobody now. And honestly, you don't even matter." I swear my blood ran cold. This wasn't just an insult. It was a subtle, venomous jab, like she was only now starting the real game, with everyone else as pawns. That's when I felt it. This was about something bigger than ordinary jealousy. So, picture this. Late at night, an empty office, even the clock ticking louder than usual. I sneak into Dad's office because my instincts, like a jolt of electricity, were telling me Taylor was up to something. I open the door and head to the safe, like some undercover agent. At first, I thought I'd open it and maybe find all of Dad's questionable accounting. Perhaps a few envelopes of cash, a couple of bank codes, or something else he never told us about. But of course, that would have been too easy. The safe was open, and what I found inside was nothing, plus a little more nothing. Well, I'm exaggerating. It wasn't entirely empty. There was a stack of documents, but guess what kind? Copies. Strange, suspicious copies. The seals were crooked. The signatures looked like someone wrote them left-handed in the dark. That's when I got chills down my spine. Was someone actually trying to forge Dad's documents and thought I wouldn't notice? Seriously? If this had been some kind of criminal comedy, I might have admired their boldness. But when I realized that these documents were likely the result of my dear sister's late-night labor, I wasn't laughing anymore. That's Taylor for you, the queen of ambition, thinking that forging a few papers and snatching everything for herself would be as simple as snapping her fingers. So there I was, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear. I thought, all right, Jake, this might not even be half of what she's capable of. I could almost picture her smirking at home, scheming her next move to claim all the old junk for herself. Going through those papers, I started to feel like this was more than just some clever manipulation. It was truly sinister. By evening, I knew I couldn't stand this comedy any longer. My dear sister thought the world revolved around her and her royal whims, but someone had to tell her it didn't. And who better than me? We agreed to meet in the office after everyone else had left. I had no intention of putting on a show for the staff. Taylor arrived as usual in her signature style. Some outrageous designer outfit that looked like she was here for the red carpet, not to discuss serious matters. She sat across from me, crossed her arms, and gave me that look, as if she was about to humor someone's minor problem. Well, buckle up, sister. This is going to be far from minor. Don't you think you're crossing the line here? I started off calmly, barely keeping my tone in check. But as soon as I said it, I knew it wouldn't be enough. I snapped and unloaded everything I'd bottled up over the years. How she was always Mom's favorite, how every stunt of hers was overlooked, how she was forgiven for the things that made me feel like a total failure. Did you seriously think I'd just stand by and watch you steal the business from me? Taylor tilted her head slightly and shot me that trademark cold smirk of hers. You've always been weak, Jacob. Dad knew it. That's why I'm here and not you. And she said it with such icy calm, as if we were just talking about the weather, as if I'd always been nothing but a spare part to her. I felt something ignite inside me. She'd just driven in the final nail. I didn't even get a chance to respond before she turned and walked out, leaving me to stew in my anger. That's when I realized I wasn't going to keep playing this losing game with her. A couple of days later, I heard news that nearly made me drop my coffee. Turns out, Taylor was planning to go to court to officially claim her rights to Dad's business. Yes, you heard me right. My sweet sister was making moves to ensure that everything, absolutely everything, would belong to her. Sounds like madness? That's what I thought too, until I realized just how serious she was. I called our lawyer, Mr. Walsh, to get a sense of the situation. He's your classic boring lawyer in a suit who barely lifts his eyes from his papers. But when he finally started talking, I realized things were headed for serious trouble. Mr. Walsh let slip that Taylor had been planning to seize the estate for a long time. She'd even met with notaries behind Dad's back while he was sick and frail. Honestly, I was stunned. It was like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. While I had assumed she was merely craving attention, she'd actually been spinning a web of lies and deception. Brilliant, right? Brilliant and horrifying. She was set on taking not only the business from me, but also the memories, the very essence of what Dad had created and believed in. That's when I realized Taylor wasn't just greedy. She was cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. I decided that enough was enough. No more complaints or sad looks at Dad's legacy. It was time to get serious, to dig up the evidence against this so-called businesswoman and expose her dirty tactics. Resolving to take action, I set off to dig through old papers, records, and files that were gathering a thick layer of dust. I opened the first drawer, and what do I see? Several checks for large sums. Not only were the amounts significant, but all of the money was being funneled to someone named Selena, right around the time when Dad was practically bedridden. Interesting. Where did these generous gifts come from? I thought, with a hint of irony. It all reeked of underhanded schemes. I kept digging and found a few more golden checks and suspicious documents. My hands were practically shaking with rage as my blood boiled. These weren't just clues. This was a direct ticket to hell version 2.0. She'd been stealing from her own father while he was bedridden, and then had the audacity to declare herself the rightful owner. Oh, of course, that's just how it works. The more I dug through these papers, the clearer it became that Selena knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't some careless mistake. No, this was her well-thought-out plan. To take what was rightfully mine, without the slightest hint of regret. With each new discovery, my anger grew. I realized that her greed and obsession with control had reached such a point that she'd lost sight of the people around her. You know, when you come to understand that someone is willing to betray even their family for money, it's terrifying. But I didn't have time for fear. I needed more evidence, and I knew that meant taking a risk. My investigation led me to a rather unpleasant truth. Turns out Tom, yes, the same Tom I'd worked with practically since childhood, was leaking confidential company information to Selena. This guy, whom I considered an ally, was a mole in every sense of the word. And you have no idea how furious I was when I found out he'd been helping her in exchange for a few promised bonuses and the hope of a bright future under her leadership. Some loyal friend, right? So I called Tom in for a talk. I wasn't just going to sit around with my hands tied. He came in barely able to lift his eyes from the floor, and I immediately knew he understood he'd been caught. I got straight to the point. Listen, Tom, I know about your little arrangement with Selena. And you know what? I have just one question. Are you out of your mind? And you know what he did? He started making excuses, his face turning whiter than paper, immediately pouring out a story about how he had no choice. Allegedly, he was threatened, that he was cornered. Yeah, right, threatened. Funny how these threats came with bonuses and promises. A perfectly convenient setup. He stammered. Jake, listen, it was just a temporary solution. I thought it would help me in the future. She said if I gave her certain, documents, I could count on a better position. But it's not what you think. His voice trembled like a school kid caught with a cheat sheet. But, you know, once someone has betrayed you, listening to their excuses is just a waste of time. I listened to his story, but inside I was boiling with rage. Hearing all these pitiful excuses, I realized that Tom's so-called friendship with me had been a sham, just a convenient deal for him. And then, the day of the trial finally arrived. I won't lie, I wasn't exactly at ease, but when I saw Taylor walk into the courtroom, something clicked in me. She looked like she was headed for a red carpet event, not a legal battle. She strutted in wearing some ultra-chic suit that screamed, "I'm 110% confident." She was ready to put on her own personal show, her eyes flashing that look that said, "Well, Jake, let the games begin." As soon as Taylor's lawyers began reading her testimony, I immediately saw that they'd prepared a full set of fake facts and documents. Listening to it all was disgusting, honestly. Every piece of evidence was so deceitful and carefully crafted that I could feel myself shaking with anger. She was truly willing to go to any lengths for money, even blatant fraud. But you know what? I was ready. The moment her attorneys paused, I stepped forward and played my trump card. Your Honor, if I may, I have something that will clarify things. I laid out genuine documents in front of the judge. Bank statements showing Taylor had been funneling my father's money into her accounts while he was on his deathbed. And that wasn't all. I brought in witnesses, people who had seen Taylor rifling through the documents, preparing her papers. Without hesitation, they confirmed they'd seen her schemes in action. I won't lie. Watching her confidence crumble was the best moment of that day. The self-assured glow Taylor wore just 5 minutes earlier slowly, painfully faded. Her mask, which she'd kept so firmly in place, started to crack. With each new piece of evidence I presented, her gaze darkened, and the gloss of arrogance evaporated. Her attorneys were visibly rattled, flipping through papers and exchanging glances as if they realized all the cards were now in my hands. The judge was watching the scene unfold, and I could see his expression changing. He finally understood who was really sitting in front of him, not just a sister, but a cold, calculating manipulator and a traitor. The verdict came swiftly. The judge ruled in my favor, and I felt a deep sense of justice as my share of the inheritance was returned to me, leaving Taylor to face the fallout from her own talents. After the trial, I went home, tossed my jacket over a chair, flopped onto the couch, and just smiled. Honestly, it was the first time I'd smiled in ages. It felt liberating. All those months, all that insane tension, days and nights burning with a desire for justice, had finally led me to this. I had managed to restore the truth, and my share of the inheritance was back where it belonged. It was as if I'd lifted a concrete block off my shoulders. The next day, someone knocked insistently at my door. I opened it, and who should it be but Taylor? My queen was looking far from the regal image she'd portrayed in court. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale, eyes red and swollen from crying. I think she was more broken than I'd ever seen her, like she'd fallen from the heavens, right onto a concrete slab. And then, the real show began, but this time, without her flashy outfits and fake smiles. She literally dropped to her knees, grabbed my hands, and began pleading for a second chance. "Please, Jacob, give me something. Anything that'll bring my life back to normal," she begged, barely holding back her sobs. Her words felt like hollow excuses, especially after everything she'd tried to pull behind my back. I looked at her and saw a person who was willing to step over anyone for her ambitions, now groveling in tears before me. I'll admit, for a moment I wanted to feel sorry for her, but no. I remembered how she humiliated me, manipulated our father, deceived everyone around her. With a calmness that even surprised me, I simply said, "Taylor, I don't feel sorry for you." She began sobbing again, clinging to my hands, begging me to give her even a small piece. But all I felt was a mild weariness at her pleas. I closed the door without looking back. From that moment on, I felt a true sense of peace. My life was finally free from her darkness. For the first time, I felt truly liberated from her schemes, her lies, her attempts to manipulate me.